Almost just fell.
And now please welcome to the stage the United Nations Envoy on Technology, Amandeep Singh Gill, for discussion on global goals in a digital era with FP's Ravi Agrawal.
Watch your step here. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Amandeep Singh Gill. He is the UN Tech Envoy. This is a busy week for you.
Yes, busy, but exciting.
Yeah. You know, one thing that's come up again and again in many of the discussions today is that tech has traditionally, historically not been a huge part of this week at the United Nations, but this year feels different. Just give us a sense of, from what you've seen as the tech envoy, what's getting done on the tech front?
In 2017, when the Secretary General first mentioned artificial intelligence in his statement, he was in a lonely crowd of 2 or 3. And this week, we've seen dozens of leaders mention digital data and AI in the context of not only the misuse and how to get the governance right, but also how to leverage them for catching up on the sustainable development goals. So it's very nice to see that happen. It's also very nice to see a kind of a more strategic approach to technology solutions, like looking at digital public infrastructure, so the connectivity piece, data starts to flow, and then the data protection and empowerment layers. How does data become more interoperable? How do we raise the quality? And then finally, the analytics layer where AI comes in. So people are not looking at AI as a fix or, connectivity as something that'll just get the GDP growth going, but more strategic, integrated view of the different pieces that need to come together, human capacity as well, to make it happen.
So let's talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. And as I'm sure all of you know who are here, while we're trying to find an optimistic angle here, I mean, the progress in general on the 17 SDGs has been awful. The world is far behind where it needs to be. So with that backdrop, where could digital technologies help? And how do you get countries to collaborate on that to move the needle on the SDGs?
Yes, I think you're right on the equation. It's quite dismal. 15% versus 85%. So at halftime, we are only up to speed on 15% of the goals and the targets, detailed targets. So we need to catch up. And there's no way we can do that without having more investments. Finance is certainly important. So the SG has called for a 500 billion annual SDG stimulus. It's the minimum we need. But then there is technology. And I believe that technology can really be the magic ingredient in the SDGs equation. And there are 2 areas where technology, particularly data and AI, can provide acceleration. One is allowing governments, decision makers, various participants in the development process, including communities, to have a better sense of where they are. So real-time knowledge of where the gaps are, who's getting left out, point sources of environmental pollution, where are plastics coming from when they flow into the ocean. So a whole disaster resilience. I was at this event just before this. Half the world doesn't have multi-hazard disaster warning systems, so which costs a lot of lives and economic losses. So all that can be accelerated with digital technologies in particular. And the second aspect is the research and development and innovation side, where AI is becoming a big factor, data is becoming a big factor. Now, that monoculture doesn't scale, but a forest scales. So we need more innovation for the SDGs, and we need more participation in the innovation ecosystem. So we need to use the accelerating power of AI for R&D. You see the progress on protein folding and other areas of scientific discovery, and kind of ground that into the SDG space, whether it's maternal and child health, etc. And last, very quickly, I think also bridging the last mile gap in terms of taking the innovation and the solutions to more people. And I want to give a quick example there. There is a civil society organization, Digital Green, that is working across Kenya, Ethiopia, and India with ministries of agriculture, with farmers, and bringing down the cost of agriculture extension, teaching climate smart agriculture to farmers. So earlier, if one extension effort needed $35, now with AI, it is down to 35 cents, a 100-fold decrease. And 2 to 3 times more women farmers are accessing this. Simple ChatGPT 3.5 in the background. The data is the YouTube videos, the Google Sheets, the call center chat logs that this NGO has developed over the years. So there is a basis, and that's an important piece. Without that data, you can't do AI. And then you use the Google USM, Universal Speech Model, to have a chat interface in the local language. Simply using WhatsApp, farmers can access the best solutions for the problems that they have.
So I have to ask you a tough question here. A lot of what you're describing to me sounds heartening, to me sounds optimistic, to me sounds hopeful, but these technologies have been around for a while, for a decade plus, and still we are, as we were discussing, far behind on the SDG goals. Why do you think that now suddenly, from 2015 to 2023, not enough got done, but now you think over the next 7 years, these same technologies will suddenly provide dividends that they didn't before?
Ravi, because we now have some success stories. So, seeing is believing. In India, for instance, through the JAM Trinity, low costs of mobile data, more bank accounts being opened, and the Aadhaar, the digital identity layer. So several 100 million people have come into the financial mainstream. And that would have taken, according to the World Bank, by traditional methods, 50 years, 5 decades. So you compress that into 7 to 9 years. So people have looked at these examples, and I could multiply them. Philippines, monitoring of the road infrastructure projects, the DIME project, the digital infrastructure monitoring and evaluation project. So people look at these examples, Bangladesh example, Rwanda example, say, oh, others are doing it, so we can also do it. And I think that's change. And I think there is also a scale aspect. There are more people connected online. Data flows have gone up. More tools and resources, including open source tools and resources, are available. And frankly, international organizations have also woken up to the fact, and they are making their own efforts across the UN system, from the International Telecommunication Union to UNDP and others. So they are being more proactive on this.
And of course, a billion people plus are still offline as well. So there's more gains and progress to be made on that front. Let me ask you this. We're here at the UN. Tech has emerged this week, as I said, as an area of optimism in general. It seems like, other than the AI aspect, which is both optimism and fear. But I'm curious what you think about the UN as a forum to get things done. There's a growing sense of criticism, of frustration about the state of the UN. In many ways, the UN is broken. The Charter has been made a mockery of with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Security Council can barely agree on anything when Russia has a veto power. China and America are at loggerheads, tend to disagree with each other on major issues. So, you work at the UN. Do you feel like you're being stymied in many of the things you want to get done?
Right. No, I don't think what you're describing is the state of the world. And
It's also the state of the UN.
The UN is us. Like, the UN is not just the Secretariat, but the UN is all its 193 member states. It's a member state-led organization. So if there are all these issues, we are kind of reflecting the state of the world. But that doesn't mean that we should accept things as they are and not make the effort. I think the Charter's values and principles still resonate. It's a powerful document. Yes, it's not being respected by everyone, and that is unfortunate. We have to push back against that. But the UN on a regular basis is an important beacon of hope for hundreds of millions of people who face food insecurity, who are struggling with climate change-induced disasters. So day in and day out, the UN works on those issues, on standards and protocols and norms that keep everything from our Wi-Fi routers to how aeroplanes fly people around the world. So there is that kind of unseen, uncelebrated aspect of the UN that goes on. I look at technology, data, and AI as a kind of a silver lining on these dark clouds. So in my work as the tech envoy, looking at AI governance, for instance, the Secretary General is going to, by the end of the month, put together this global AI advisory body on AI governance. There I see across these divides that you mentioned, and also going beyond member states, looking at the private sector players, there is a great interest and support for the convening role of the UN in bringing different perspectives, different voices together. At the end of the day, you can't say climate change is the problem of Europe or that of someone else. It's everyone's problem. And AI is going to be everyone's problem. It's a humanity level issue.
But respectfully, I don't think the criticism is that the UN has failed to convene. I think the criticism is that the UN fails to get things done.
Right, yes. So that is fair in many ways, but I would contest that from my own experience. For 2 years, I chaired a negotiation on using AI in weapon systems. Does that align with international humanitarian law, international human rights law? 125 countries, including China, US, Russia, very different views. But we managed to land consensus on some very, very important guiding principles as AI comes more into these weapon systems. So this was just a few years back. So I could multiply these examples, protecting some of the ocean spaces. Again, recently we've reached agreement. So there are these areas where we are constantly making progress on. I mean, the headlines often focus on what's wrong, but not what's getting done and what is going right. And in my area, I'm particularly confident that we'll continue to build on these successes.
Well, as someone who's often responsible for the headlines, I'll take that criticism. But here we are. AI, Biden used the words peril and promise in his speech. Do you see that as an equal split, a 50-50 split of peril and promise, or is the peril just much greater than the promise?
I think it's quite nuanced, and it also depends on where you are. Where you sit determines where you stand. Like in Asia, I see more optimism. In Africa, I see a mix of optimism and concern. And people are not looking for easy answers. It's not a dichotomy. This is a repurposable technology. And there's also the question of who's participating in it, who's creating it, who's governing it. There are questions around equity and access. So there is the risk side of it. We have to get that right. In the now category, the medium-term category, shifts in the job market, etc., and in the long-term category, where some people talk of existential risks. But we also have to get the opportunity landscape right. If it is 7 or 10 companies that are going to use AI for the world, then that's not going to cut it. I think we need probably 7 million, 70 million social entrepreneurs, private sector companies around the world leveraging AI for good. And then obviously the promise, in terms of promise for humanity, solving these societal challenges by accelerating research and development around climate change, the plastics problem, and many, many more health.
Let me see if I can take a question from the audience. Sir, I saw your hand there. Let me see if there's anyone else. Maybe we can take a couple at the same time. All right, sir, we'll come to you. I think it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Srikanth. I completely agree with you with respect to the Jam Trinity and the financial inclusion. In fact, I was the CTO of the Aadhaar project in India. The question is, the reason why digital public infrastructure worked in India was because it was created, the protocols were created, blessed, and endorsed by the government, which is the correct authority, if you will, for public goods. Mm-hmm. I don't see that in many countries. The corporate sectors sort of takes the role to create identity systems and so on, and public goods is not their end goal, and rightly so. Profitability is, markets are their goals. So do you see, as we try to take this message and platform of DPIs to the rest of the world towards sustainable development goals, do you see other countries also recognize that DPIs have to be supported by governments? They have to bless them. It cannot be sort of abrogated to the corporate sector to carry this responsibility.
Right. I think each country will come to this from their own experience. You know, India's experience, while applicable to many other locations, is fairly unique. You know, even in terms of safeguards, you know, the Supreme Court came in, the Parliament passed a law, and civil society made sure that the right balance was created. And at the end of the day, the tech stack comes from a volunteer community. The government adopted it, but it was this community based in Bangalore that created it, and you are part of that community. So it was a mixture of, and today if you look at the stack, the private sector is an important player. So at the end of the day, digital public infrastructures are not an infrastructure in the traditional sense. They are an innovation ecosystem, common rails, guardrails, where both public sector and private sector can play. So I see the market, the government, and civil society coming together nicely in this. And that's perhaps the most powerful lesson coming out of the India experience. The other lesson is that each country would have its own persuasive use cases. For India, it was financial inclusion. That really made everyone sit up and got that societal level collaboration going, and now more things are coming on. But in other countries, it may be another use case. Agriculture and food security may be the use case that helps build trust and the confidence in the ministries, such as the Ministry of Finance. You know, oh, you talk about digital, but you know, we are not sure we should be putting money in there. So each country will have to discover its own use cases. And we have to kind of unbundle the DPI concept in terms of, you know, what are the public goods that are, you know, that you Lego-like you can put together in different contexts. And I see that as very promising now that the G20 has agreed on a DPI framework. Last Sunday at the Digital Day, my office and the UNDP together launched a DPI Safeguards initiative to build an international standard to ensure safety, inclusion, human rights, and sustainability. So we need to kind of create those spaces where learning can happen and we can keep the standards high.
I'll ask you one last question. It seems, oh, we have another hand. Let me go to the audience then. Yes, if you can tell us your name and the question, please.
Hi, my name is Masa. I also work at the UN, so thank you for that great response about all the great things that UN does that's not often headlines. Someone mentioned before the analogy of how there's talk about regulating AI, much like we try to regulate like through IAEA, nuclear technology, and I know you have a PhD in this topic on nuclear learning, which is really interesting. So given what we know about the challenges with the member states within, and how the tensions are within IAEA, so on the one hand, there's countries saying, for example, you know, there's non-compliance, though other countries saying that those who have it are saying that countries who don't have it shouldn't have it. So there's a lot of issues in that space. But as someone had pointed out correctly, I think it's perhaps because it's more measurable, it might be easier to monitor than AI, because it's not just states that, even though we would want states to comply with whatever UN brings out in terms of governance in this space, there's all types of actors that can have access to AI. So even if governments are on board with such an agreement, there's challenges. So given the work that you're leading and really important things that are coming ahead in the international community, what's your thoughts on using the IAEA, or for those who don't know what that is basically nuclear international governance mechanisms for nuclear technology in the AI space? Thank you.
And if I can just add on to that, and we'll close with this, the nuclear analogy is used for a lot of things in terms of a potential governance framework for AI, but also in terms of creating a world of haves and have-nots.
Absolutely.
Which is a phrase we've used for years with nuclear. So how do you think about that?
I think that's a great point, too. Nuclear, there is a tangibility. There are only two parts to the bomb: high enriched uranium and separated plutonium. So you know the choke points. There are discrete production processes. What are the sensitive materials? And the non-proliferation regime has been built around that understanding of tech and how it translates into the weapon. And the IA is not only about non-proliferation, but it's also about nuclear safety and security. So again, something to think about in terms of the safety side of AI. And then there is the peaceful uses side, in the uses in agriculture, for generating electricity and so on, promoting that. So it's tempting to think of the IA as a model, and I've seen some writings that talk about AI in terms of choke points. There's licensing. This is the kind of technological terms we use in non-proliferation, intangible controls, But I don't think there are any easy translations. AI is a very different beast. The private sector's involvement, the fact that thousands of people, and the AI chain itself, AI is not like separate from the data side and the digital public infrastructure side. The data value chain has its own complexities. So we'll have to be more creative with this. Look at, this question of haves and have-nots, excess and equity, in addition to the promise and the peril. And also look at it in terms of other exemplars. IMO, the International Maritime Organization, Civil Aviation Organization, where standards are set, but their implementation is with national, or the IPCC model. Of course, this will have to be multi-stakeholder. How a group of scientific experts from around the world comes together to build consensus on what's most concerning in terms of the risk, for instance, in the AI space. So there are good examples, and this AI advisory body that the Secretary General is convening, and yesterday we had an event on this issue, very well attended. So that will look at these kind of issues, models of governance, risk mapping, opportunities, and also what's happening in the governance landscape, how we can build more connective tissue on this. Today, we are focused on the consequences, and I'm not ruling this out. At some stage, we might have to start worrying about the capabilities also. Then it becomes more like a nuclear discussion. If LLM surprised us, even those who were experts, 5-10 years down the lane, we may have something else. So let's keep it under watch.
Amandeep Singh Gill, thank you so much for your time. Really great to chat.
Thank you. Ravi, thank you for your time.